A gaming company listening to the gaming community to see what it wants and reacting? That's refreshing. You'll remember that between CES and the release of the Atari Gamestation Pro, my arcade heard our request and added an SD card slot. And during my review, I discovered that yes, indeed, you can add your own games to this. And in fact, in this video, I'm going to show you how you can add more than 10,000 new games that doesn't come included with this to your Gamestation Pro. Let's get after it right after this. This video supported in part by...
Playing VR, I tend to sweat. It gives me an edge. So King of Nerds happens to give me an edge too. Let King of Nerds give you the edge. Bye, King of Nerds.
Hey there, welcome back to GenXGrownUp. I'm John and I am a GenXGrownUp. And many people responded over in my review of the Atari Gamestation Pro when I asked, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see how to expand yours. That's all the comments that I got, basically, on that video and every video between then and now. People say, when are you going to show us how to add games to the Gamestation Pro? This is that video, as you already know, because you clicked on the thumbnail. And I know that sometimes tutorial videos can start to seem like stereo instructions. I'm going to try to keep it as interesting as I can, but there's a lot of little minutia that you need to know. The first thing that you need to know is there's no right way to do this. There are no instructions for me to throw away. This is all what I discovered through the course of trial and error, and I'm sharing it with you. You very well could take this. In fact, you should take this and improve upon it. Find ways to make it better. Let us know down in the comments how you've improved upon this. And if the thing changes over time, if there's new things to discover or new firmware comes along, an update video might be in order, and I might include things that you have found. So, the first things first, yes, we're going to upgrade beyond the 200 games that come on the Gamestation Pro. You need a micro SD card. In the case of this video, I have a 64 gig SanDisk micro SD. 64 gig is plenty, frankly. 128 would be overkill, I think. And when you put the card into your computer, if it's already been in the Gamestation Pro, the only thing on it will be a game save folder. We're going to create a brand new folder called Games, plural, G-A-M-E-S. Now, every ROM file we add to the Gamestation Pro is going to go in this folder. Unfortunately, there's no support for subfolders or anything, so it's just going to be a giant ocean of files that we're going to add. And when we plug it into the Gamestation Pro, we're going to see all those files in a big flat file viewer too. So in general, and I'll say this several times, maybe don't do what I'm doing and add thousands of games. Add your favorite few hundred games, but you can do what I'm doing because I'm doing it right now, so you're about to see what it takes and what it's going to look like. I want to start with a very quick preview of where we are going here. So I have the SD card in my GSP right now, just as it was when I did my review. So I power it on and wait for the boot sequence, and you're going to see how the Gamestation Pro will behave once we have that SD card provisioned correctly. After the boot up, we'll go to the main screen briefly. And then we get a pop-up that says, hey, would you like to use the SD card as local storage or as a readable micro SD card that has more stuff? Local storage is the way it would behave normally. Just save games and that's it. But if you move the joystick over here to micro SD card and hit the A button, you are now browsing the contents of that SD card and all of the ROMs that you put on it. So this is exactly what we're going to accomplish for you in this video, but rather than 4 pages of games, we're going to have hundreds of pages of games, thousands of games for you to play. The next thing to know, and you'll see this painfully evident when we plug in our SD card, there's no method of sort or search through this ocean of files on the Gamestation Pro. As close as I can tell, its default search is like timestamp or something, plus like maybe alphabetization after that, I'm not sure. In general, I would say copy chunks of files together because they're going to end up in the menu in the order in which you copied them in, sort of, so it seems. That could change in the future, but right now, that's how it is. And finally, we're talking here about ROM files, and I, in general, do not like to link to ROM files external from my videos. That's not entirely true in the case of this video. There are a few collections that we will need, and I will give you links down in the description, where you can find links to all the files that I can link you to, also any of the materials that I use, like the SD card that I used, all of that, links to all the material is going to be down in the description. And finally, again, you can skip any of these steps if you want to. This is what worked for me in my trial and error to try to get as many games as possible for as many platforms as possible onto the Gamestation Pro. So without further ado, let's get started. And we're going to start with the native games, this is an Atari console, let's start with Atari ROMs. So first up is the Atari 2600. And in the case here, there are bundles out there that you can pick up, and since Atari Age is now owned by Atari and it's still being hosted there, I feel very safe in giving you a link to Draxon's Atari Archive. Now this is the same archive we used to expand the AtGames Flashback Gold. In this case though, we're just going to extract all of the ROM files from it, which are all the files that have the file extension .A26. I have found the GSP is very happy when files have the correct extension, though not always mandatory. Again, it worked best for me. And not only will I ensure that all of the ROM files have the .A26 extension, using a tool like Advanced Renamer, I did a global rename where I added 2600 as a prefix to each file. That means when I'm browsing through them in the Gamestation Pro, it's easier to find out what version of a game I'm looking at before I even launch it, since we don't have the benefit of sorting or indexing or any thumbnailing or anything like that. Once your files are ready, you're going to drag them all directly into that newly created games folder on the SD card. Now, I had about 900 game ROMs that I put on here, so that's a good start. That gets us nearly 1,000 more games. Once you plug in the SD card and you're ready to start playing, here's what you should know about playing expanded 2600 games on the GSP. I didn't really run into any problems at all playing games. Even Pitfall 2 played great, which can be quite a challenge. I honestly didn't explore any of the homebrew stuff, but I don't have many of those as straight ROM images. I have the original cartridges, so someone else will have to check that out for us. But what I can tell you is you have access to all of the switches the GSP provided for the 2600 games that it ships with. That means you have access to changing the color black and white switch and both the difficulty switches. Across the board, you should know game saves are not supported for any expanded ROMs, nor, as I mentioned in my review, does the paddle work in expanded ROMs. But the joystick and the buttons, difficulty switches, all that works fine, so go nuts on 900 more Atari 2600 games. Next up is the Atari 5200. Now go source some ROMs. I'm not going to give you a link to these, but just search Google for Atari 5200 ROM set. You can find them. Trust me, it's not that difficult. Now in this case, we're going to take all those ROMs and do the same kind of file manipulation. We're going to ensure that the file extension is .A52. GSP seems to like that. And I choose to put the prefix 5200 on the front of all these files so I can more easily identify them once I get them into the GSP. In my library, I had about 150 5200 games, so they're all going right into my games folder now that they're renamed. Once I put that SD card into the Gamestation Pro, 5200 games now at my disposal. Now, there are quite a few limitations here, as my arcade will tell you. For example, the 5200 had an analog joystick. You really don't have the benefit of that there, so those games might be pretty unplayable. Also, any game that requires keypad input, you could be at a loss. But caveat emptor, this was not part of the original shipping image, so play what you can. This is basically why, even though we're putting more than 10,000 games onto the GSP in this case, I'm not sure they're all going to work, so I'm just going to lowball this. Truth in advertising, we're calling it 10,000 new games that are actually easily playable once we do this expansion. Okay, how about Atari 7800 games? Same deal here. We are not going to give you a link to the 7800 games. You can find them on Google. You probably already have them in your library. I'm going to prepare them much like I did the previous two. Change the extension to .A78, and I'm going to put a prefix 7800 on the front. Just makes them easier to find once I put the SD card into the Gamestation Pro. I had about 300 7800 games in my library, and I had no trouble playing any of them, quite honestly. Look, you have two buttons really easily. That's whether or not use your own controller or the original Gamestation Pro controller. Use that A and the B button, and it works swimmingly. Again, remember, no game saves or anything like that. Look, before we move ahead into other consoles and arcade games, I want to take just a second to make sure you know about our merch store. If you head over to GenXGrownUp.com/merch, you can find like a GenXGrownUp t-shirt, yeah, of course, but way more than that. Look, do you enjoy things like arcade games and Nintendo and Sega and Miss Pac-Man and Galaga and cool stuff like that? Really, any fandom in or out of gaming? We have it in our merch store, and every dollar you spend, every t-shirt you buy, goes to help independent content creation, just like this video. I appreciate it if you would take a look. Holidays are coming up. do your Christmas shopping over at our merch store if you think of it. Okay, let's move on to some more consoles. We're going to jump into Nintendo's territory. Now we're going to look at Game Boy games. This is the original black and white handheld from Nintendo that I never owned but borrowed from people and really enjoyed it because it was kind of a game-changing experience, pun actually intended. I was able to find about 800 Game Boy games. That's after filtering out like foreign language games. So similar to my other ones, I like to update this using a renaming tool. I change all the file extensions to .gb and I put a prefix of GB at the beginning. Again, that just helps me find them more easily when I'm browsing on the Gamestation Pro's file menu. Once those files are ready, drag them into your games folder, and when you throw them into your Gamestation Pro, you're going to find, like I did, no gotchas. I didn't run into any games that wouldn't launch, nor did I find any games I could not play easily. And it's because this is a really old platform and the games just work. You have a directional and an A and a B button, you have a start button, and that's all you need, and it's all right there for you. So now you can spend a lot of time playing Game Boy games like I did, or you can move along into the territory of the Game Boy Advance, the color handheld that came along a few years later. Now the Game Boy Advance, I was able to find, even after pruning out foreign language, over 1,700 games for the Game Boy Advance. In the case here, using my renamer, I'm going to change the extension to .gba, and I'll put GBA on the front, a prefix of the file, so I can find it easily in the file browser. Once your files are ready, drag them all into our games folder, and when you plug this joker into the Gamestation Pro, you are in for some fun. Now I have some good news and some bad news and some more good news as it relates to the Game Boy Advance. I didn't have any games that would not launch, they all played. I did find that Game Boy Advance games tend to stutter a bit, they're running a little slow, so depending on the type of game, whether it's action or strategy, you might have mixed reactions to how that behavior is, but it didn't bother me too much. Really, it's just like music is kind of slowed down a little bit, and when I was playing Mario Kart, I felt like it was a little bit sluggish. Though I was playing the 50cc, maybe that was the problem. But more good news is, if the Game Boy Advance game previously had battery save, it supports game saves, so you can have progress you can resume later. Plus, if you have your own X input controller, like I'm using my Xbox One Elite controller, if you need those buttons to do things like hop in Mario Kart or throw a shell, or over in Advance Wars where it's used to do interrogation and understand what's up with troops, those buttons are instantly recognized. We can't do any remapping of controls, but they're already kind of mapped the way you need them out of the box. So Game Boy Advance is going to give you a lot of entertainment on the Gamestation Pro. All right, now we're moving into the big boys, the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Yeah, it works here. After pruning some foreign language ROMs, I was down to 2,800 NES titles. There's probably some duplication in there, but again, that's why I'm only claiming 10,000 games. In the case of NES, again, go into a file management tool of your liking. You want to change the extension to .nes, and I put the prefix NES on the head of it again so it's easy to find. Once your files are ready, drop them in that games folder, put the SD card into your Gamestation Pro, and away you go. There is nothing but good news for the NES here. I had no problems launching any games, and game saves, again, are supported. If you want to play longer form games like Legend of Zelda or some other RPG that had a battery in it previously, you can do that here on the GSP. You can play the game, come back to it later, pick up from where you left off, because both your ROM file and your game saves all live on that same SD card. Now, there are thousands of hours you could spend on NES games, or we can move along and add Sega Genesis ROMs. Go source your ROMs like I did, just use Google. I ended up with about 1,000 Sega Genesis ROMs. Now here's what you want to do. Change the file extension to all of them to .bin, a bin file. Like I also put Genesis on the front of them. I think I put GEN on the front of them, again, just so I can find them more easily, and since there's no sorting in the game station. And once all the files are ready, drag them into that games folder along with everything else. Plug your card into the console, and away we go. The default Genesis controller was an ABC controller. The Gamestation Pro controller is an ABC controller. You've got everything that you need. I had no problem launching any games for Genesis. I spent a lot of time playing a lot of games. That's why this video wasn't out last week, because I had to play hundreds of games before I could even tell you about it. So now, if you're keeping score, you'll see that we're up to almost 10,000 new games on our GSP. And you might be thinking to yourself, John, you promised more than 10,000 games. Yeah, I did. We're up to our last topic, our last platform we're going to do, and it's arcade ROMs, for which I have about 8,000 for you. Now, The newer they are, the less likely they are to work. Also, we'll have the problem of, is the controller compatible? Because you can't remap anything. That is a problem for you to enjoy figuring out as you try to play through all these games. The double good news is I have a source for these ROMs. You can't just grab any MAME ROMs. What we need are reference ROMs from circa 2000. There are a couple of sets available, and they're available on archive.org, the Internet Archive. And I'm going to recommend here you grab 2 different sets for different reasons. First, there's a small archive you can grab of the MAME.37B5. Download that directly from archive.org. We'll get to that in a second. Then there's the bulk of the ROMs, the correct ROMs we need. The other one's just for samples. Again, we'll get to that. And this is the second link. And again, all the links are in the description. This is the MAME 0.139. Now, these are all reference set ROMs that are unmerged. They're already zipped just like you need them. There are thousands of them to download. You can click on the individual ones that you want. You can use a download manager, whatever it takes, but they're out there for you to get. There are plenty. Get your favorites, get them all, whatever it is that you want to get. Now, unlike the consoles, we're not going to do any file manipulation or renaming here because the embedded MAME actually needs these file names to recognize what game it's running. So don't tinker with that. And we're going to take the ROMs from the 0.139 set, copy them as is, zipped up, right onto the SD card in that games folder. You'll see that games folder is getting pretty darn full now. While we're doing that, some games of this era had trouble emulating some sounds. So in the other archive we grabbed, that was the 37B5 set, just copy that samples folder. That's all. Just take the samples folder, drop that right into the same games folder that we have on the SD card. Those will come in handy. You'll find out right away what things don't work if you don't do this, and you'll wish you had those sounds. So just trust me, grab those 2 if you're going to get any arcade games at all. These are going to take a while to copy. Go get a Mountain Dew, wait for it, come back. Now, time to take that SD card, throw it in the Gamestation Pro. Arcade games are available to you now. There are a few caveats. It's up to you to find out which ones work and don't work. I did not go through and test 8,000 games. Generally, the more modern the game, the more poorly it will run on the Gamestation Pro, just because it is a small single board computer with not that much processing power. So you'll find out as you play through games what works correctly and what doesn't. Also, just like with the 5200, controller limitations. If the game had a trackball or 2 joysticks or a whole bunch of buttons like Defender, you probably aren't going to be able to play very well, but you'll find those games that do and don't work. It's a limitation of the locked down nature of our emulator since we don't have control over remapping or anything like that. So try out games, find which ones work. Also, you'll find that not every single arcade game will launch. There'll be a few that you try to launch and they'll just refuse. This is probably fixable by tweaking the ROM set. I didn't go through the process of digging through every single ROM. The reality was, for every one that didn't work, another dozen did, so I figured, there are plenty that do work. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that. You'll also notice that any games that are intended to be vertical, that 3:4 ratio, get stretched to horizontal. So that's just how it is. I noticed that for games that were shipped with the Gamestation Pro, honestly, so I guess it's just how they have it configured. The other good news, though, is that high scores save. If you get a great game, get a high score, when you come back to it, your high score will still be on that leaderboard. Now, we have that SD card ready. It has all those files that we put on it across all those platforms, arcade, and all the consoles. I have it in the unit now, so I'm just going to turn it off and back on. And we'll get that menu once more. Now, in this case, I'm using my Xbox Pro controller. In fact, let's turn off that cool music because I need access to more buttons for some of the stuff we're going to look at here. So rather than local storage, I'm going to pick micro SD card. Now, the more files you have on this SD card, the longer this will take. So you'll see me click once and jump right to the menu, but it's going to take a while. All right, here's the menu. And like I said, it took a while. It took almost 4 full minutes to index this card. 10 ROMs per page, so 10 games. And you look down here, 1,608 pages. That means there are 16,000 ROM images now on this Gamestation Pro. So, I mean, you can flip through them and see page after page and see how the naming really helps. So I know it's 2600 stuff, and then when I get out of that, I have a long way to go to get to the 7800, 5200. We'll all be here eventually. Hey, there's 5200 stuff. I don't necessarily recommend that you put this many ROMs on your Gamestation Pro, unless you want to take 5 minutes to boot the thing up every time. You should curate your ROMs a little better than I did, but they're all here. I can move through them. But as an illustration now, you can see just how much stuff we have put on this unit, and it is a lot of stuff. How is that for expansion? We just took this $99 gadget, added a $15 SD card, and a little bit of ingenuity, and we added over 10,000 more gaming experiences at our fingertips without any additional investment. Now keep in mind, this worked this way as of the time of me creating this video. They might embrace this ROM expansion and add features in future firmware like folder support or sorting or searching. Maybe they turn on more emulators like Super Nintendo, which I couldn't get to work no matter how much I tried. Or they could go the other way and they could turn it all off in the next firmware update. I don't know, but we'll keep track of it. And since they added the SD card, I find it hard to believe they would pull it out from under us after we're having so much fun with it, but we will see. Look, I'm going to throw some links over my shoulder here and here to some more coverage I have done on the Gamestation Pro. I absolutely hope you found something to enjoy in this video, and I can't wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.